A vicar's experience. I have encountered instances of people walking out of meetings, talk of praying out unpopular vicars, and rudeness going unquestioned. Have met leaders who have been deeply wounded by behavior of church members, and church members deeply wounded by the behavior of leaders. Have come across churches deeply divided by issues of style, theology, and personality, where the relationship between minister and congregation has completely broken down. You see, church conflict doesn't start with a real fight. It starts with the whispers, the side conversations. The bottom line is that conflict in the church isn't just theory. It's real, it's painful, and it damages both leaders and members alike. Welcome to Christian Leadership Insight. Today we're focusing on the sources of conflict in the church. It is important to put this into perspective. A study conducted by Lifeway Research identified conflict as one of the reasons why pastors leave ministries. As you can see from this graph here, one of the major reasons they leave is to do with change in calling. The next reason has to do with conflict in the church. So it's not something we can just ignore. It exists, and it also depends on the perspective how we view conflict. So what's really causing the division? Before we answer that question, let's just remind ourselves that conflict runs throughout Scripture, from wars between kings to disputes among church leaders. In the Old Testament, we have Cain and Abel, Esau and Jacob, Joseph and his brothers, Saul and David, Nehemiah and Sanballat. In the New Testament, we have the case of Paul and Peter, Paul and Barnabas, division over leaders, Paul and Apollos, the book of Corinthians, and the list goes on. Conflict in the church can be addressed from three different perspectives. We can look at it from an organizational, relational, and personal perspective. Now, let's take a look at the organizational factors. Unclear vision or goals. People are not clear about the direction that the church is going, so that can be a source of conflict. Competition for limited resources, especially when someone focuses on their own personal needs instead of the church. Resistant to change. When people are used to a particular way of doing things, then they become more resistant when new ideas are introduced. Then there's the abuse of power and leadership style. That is a big area as well. And then we talk about personality. Clash of personalities can be a source of conflict. Other areas that we do not like to talk about, but it exists in the church and we have to call it for what it is racism, tribalism, and discrimination. Yes, they do exist in the church. Favoritism and nepotism. These are things that you think about in secular organization, but is being brought into the church. Poor communication. Past and current conflicts ignored or unresolved, they tend to resurface. That is why it's important to find a way to address conflict instead of just ignoring it. Injustice, another reason. We see these things played out in church and we have to call them out. Relational conflict can take different forms. It can exist between members where they have different views, they come from different backgrounds, aspirations, and priorities. It can exist between pastor and members where they have contrasting aims. Their incentives are different, they have different approaches of doing things, and between tradition and modern views where stability is weighed against adaptability. It can also exist between generations and between ministries where there is rivalry over funding, rivalry over personnel, and visibility. Personal triggers, pride, arrogance, ego, envy, greed, anger, and frustration. These are negative emotions that can trigger conflict. Some people carry around unresolved baggage. And because these issues are not being addressed, they can spill into relationships and their communities. This also is a major source of conflict. So how we view conflict, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, depends on the perspective. For some of us, we have the unitary perspective where we believe that the church is an integrated and harmonious whole with pastors and congregants sharing common interests and objectives. So what happens? The practice and culture reflects more of a unitary ideology. Conflict is perceived as disruptive, it's unnatural. The church is one group with a common source of loyalty, one focus, and an accepted leader. But is this real? Is this a good way to perceive conflict, to see it as something negative, and therefore we have to pretend that everything is fine? Is that the way to deal with it? The pluralistic perspective does not see conflict as a bad thing. In fact, we begin to see the church as a place made up of powerful and competing subgroups with their own legitimate loyalties, objectives, and leaders. This certainly would lead to conflict. So conflict is inevitable. In fact, it can be an agent for evolution. People have different perspectives. They have different ways of thinking, different loyalties. Conflict will exist. So let's just remind ourselves, conflict is a daily occurrence among people, a common part of human existence. I've just picked up 4 points from a training manual, conflict management skills for church leaders and members. This now tells you that it is a real issue. Disruption will exist because of our thoughts, our wants, and our ideas. We do have opposing thoughts, actions, or ideas. Sometimes it carries, the word conflict itself carries negative connotation. But again, this depends on your perspective, whether you believe in a unitary perspective or you want to adopt a pluralistic one. The conflict itself is not necessarily a bad thing. The issue is the church improper response to it. If avoided, it goes underground temporarily, but it will resurface later. So here's the question. Which of these sources of conflict is already at work in your church? Name it. Don't ignore it. It's very important. In part 2, we'll discuss the biblical blueprint to address it before it spreads. Subscribe and turn on your notification so you don't miss it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in my next video.